Since ancient times, salt has been much more than a seasoning or a food preservative. In the Bible, salt is mentioned in various contexts, some evident, and others hidden from superficial view. Could it be that salt, beyond its everyday use, is actually a spiritual weapon? The answer to this question leads us into biblical passages full of symbolism, where salt represents purity, permanence, and even an element in spiritual warfare. The hidden truth of salt in the Bible is deeper than it seems, and within its nuances, we find a tool that God has used in spiritual and transcendent ways. The first indication of its spiritual significance is found in Leviticus 2:13, "And you shall season all your grain offerings with salt. You shall not let the salt of the covenant with your God be missing from your grain offering. With all your offerings you shall offer salt." Here, salt is used as a symbol of the covenant between God and His people. Salt is incorruptible and endures over time, reflecting the eternal nature of divine covenants. Through this simple substance, God established a perpetual reminder of the purity and firmness of His promise. It is no coincidence that salt is present in the offerings. Its inclusion signals a spiritual level where this element embodies the unbreakable commitment between God and man. In 2 Kings 2:21, the prophet Elisha uses salt to heal the poisoned waters of Jericho. Then he went to the spring of the water and threw salt in it and said, "Thus says the Lord, I have healed this water. From now on, neither death nor miscarriage shall come from it." This action, though seemingly simple, reveals a profound spiritual power. The salt thrown into the water acts not only as a physical agent, but as an instrument of divine authority. Here, salt represents divine intervention, restoration, and the cleansing of evil. If water in the Bible often represents life, when it is contaminated, salt has the power to purify, to restore what has been corrupted. In this act, salt transforms into a spiritual weapon to reverse curses and bring healing to the land. Jesus himself also speaks of salt in a spiritual context in Matthew 5:13, where he says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet." This statement has profound implications. Salt is a symbol of the spiritual influence believers are called to exert in the world. However, Jesus warns that salt can lose its flavor, suggesting that a person's spiritual power can dissipate if they do not remain firm in their faith. This is a direct warning about the danger of allowing our spiritual nature to dilute and lose its effectiveness in the world. In a spiritual sense, being salt means being a purifying, preserving, and protective presence amid a corrupt and decaying world. But the most enigmatic and perhaps unsettling use of salt in the Bible is found in Genesis 19:26, where Lot's wife is turned into a pillar of salt for disobeying God and looking back as they fled the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. This transformation into salt is a symbolic and powerful reminder of divine judgment. Salt, which in many passages represents purity and eternity, here becomes a symbol of warning. Looking back toward the corruption of the past can lead to eternal destruction. Lot's wife's fate becomes a spiritual lesson, a sign of what happens when someone does not fully submit to God's will. Here, salt acts as a visible judgment, turning a person into a monument of disobedience. Salt, therefore, not only has an everyday use in the Scriptures, but is also deeply intertwined with the spiritual realm. In Colossians 4:6, Paul advises, "Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person." This mention of salt is fascinating because Paul is not talking about literal salt, but about spiritual salt. Words seasoned with salt refer to language that brings edification, wisdom, and discernment. The use of salt here symbolizes the believer's ability to communicate with truth, grace, and a divine touch. The words that come out of a believer's mouth, when imbued with divine wisdom, have a purifying, restoring power that heals the listener, much like how physical salt heals wounds or preserves food. The use of salt in the Bible is neither accidental nor trivial. From its role in covenants to its use in divine judgments, salt is a spiritual tool that reminds us of purity, judgment, and God's permanence. In fact, in Mark 9:49-50, Jesus again emphasizes, "For everyone will be salted with fire. Salt is good, but if the salt has lost its saltiness, how will you make it salty again? Have salt in yourselves, and be at peace with one another." Here Jesus connects salt with fire and judgment, suggesting that salt not only preserves and purifies, but also prepares us to endure the fiery trials that shape our spiritual character. Salt, symbolically, helps us withstand and purify ourselves amid difficulties, keeping us focused on God's will. In summary, salt is more than just a simple mineral. In the Scriptures, it is a spiritual weapon that represents covenant, purification, judgment, and restoration. The Bible invites us to understand that just as salt preserves life, our connection with God must be seasoned with purity, steadfastness, and faithfulness. Because in the field of spiritual warfare, even the smallest details, like salt, can have an eternal impact. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. And, of course, share your thoughts in the comments. Together, we can build a strong and positive community. Thank you for joining us on this journey of growth and transformation. See you in the next video.